I tēnei huihuinga o te kaunihera arohe o te mataua Māui nei rā te mihi kia koutou. Ngā manuhiri, ngā kaimahi, ngā kai kaunihera, tēnā tātou katoa. Me tīmata mo te karakia, me hoa atu te raka ki a koe, Councillor Hawke anga kia tuwhera tēnei hui. Kia ora.
I roto i ngā manaakitanga o te rungarawa tēnei au, kia taki karakia, kia kotahi ai tātou i ngā whakaaro nui o te kaupapa me ngā tuahuatanga o ngā kōrero o te rangi nei. Nō reira, koutou mā ngā kai kaunihira, koutou rā ngā kai mahi, tēnei anō tātou kia taki ai te karakia whakataka te hau. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tana. Kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai.
E hia ki ana te ātakura, he tio, he uka, he hau, tihei, Māori.
A tihei Māori ora taki tihei ki runga ki tēnei ko te pai tuku kōrero. A tuatahi nei ki whakaaro ake rā, a ki ngā mate huhu o te wā. Nō reira rā e Kate, tētahi o ngā kaimahi o tō tātene kaunihira, kua rū peke peke hia ki tua o te arai. Moi mai rā e hoa, moi mai rā, moi mārire. Haere hoki rā koe ki te taha o rātau, kua ngaro i te tiruhanga kanohi, ko rātau te tūtanga o te poehu, te whiunga o te kupu i te wai takatu ai rātau. Nā ruana te whenua ngā o kuana te moa nei te hinga ngā o ngā tōtara whakahai o te wāo. Nei ka poto ki te pō, wai ho rātou kia tiraha ake. Nō reira rā i roto i ngā mihi ki ngā mate, e pēnei pēa te kōrero. Mai i a rangi nui e tū nei, papa tuanuku e hora ake nei. Whitu te kau ngā whakatupuranga, he Māori, he Māori, he Māori. Kare anō, kia mutuhia. Ana, māku e ki atu ki a tātou, ko te whāinga, he whitu te kau anō ngā whakatipuranga, e whawhai tonu ana. I mua i a tātou i tēnei rā. Nō reira rā, anika rā ngā whakaaro nui ki a koutou kua hara mai a tīnana mai, ki te ahara, ki te tautoko i ngā kōrero ko kōrero hia nei, i ngā wiki, i ngā marama, i ngā tau kua pāhure ake, Nā koutou ngā kai kaunihira no te rohe o here taunga, nau mai rahiri mai. No te kaunihira o ahuriri, nau mai, tautoko mai. Koutou te whānau, ngā mana whenua e whakakanohi mai i o hāpori, e whakakanohi mai i o marae, i o hapu, i o iwi. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou i te whakakakuhu tia i o koutou whakaaro, tikanga rāne, rahiri mai rā, piki mai, kake mai. Kake mai rā ki runga i te kaupapa te rangi nei tuatahi a rā ko ngā tūru Māori. Tēnā anō hoki koutou kua hara mai ki te tautoko, a i ngā kōrero i te wānanga, te tūmanako, kia tutuki pai ai i ngā whāinga kei mui a tātou. A rā atu ana, te manako nui, kanoho pūmau, kanoho tūturu, ngā tūru Māori, hori rapa i te motu. Nō reira rā, tēnā koutou, kua tai timu, kua tai pari, i roto i ngā manaakitanga, tō tātai nei, tūturu whakapono, he Māori, he Māori, he Māori anō. Kua rangatira te rā, tā te mea rā, kua tātou kai kaunihira huri rauna. Koutou rā, tēnā anō hoki koutou kua tautoko hia mai i tēnei wahanga o tātou. Arā, kia whakawhanake mai tō tātou mana motuhake, tō tātou tino rangatiratanga ki roto ki tēnei. O reira, te tātene komiti Māori, arā atu ana ko te RPC, ngā rōpū, take kreme, tēnā koutou i tai tūara mai i enei tūru Māori o tātou. O reira rā, Tēnā koutou, a tēnā koutou, a kāti mai rā, rahiri mai rā, tēnā tātou, katoa e tau, e hora. O te re ana ngā re, uri ane e te ao, oroia, oroia, e te ua, whiti, whitia, e te rā. Tēnā rā koutou, te Kaunihira Quartet, tēnā koutou.
Harawe, kia ora Councillor Hokianga mō kupu, tuatahi me te aumihi kia tātou katoa kei roto I tēnei whare. It is a warm welcome to you all for this auspicious event. There are many decision items on our agenda today, but we do start with our Māori constituencies item. So councillors and members around the table, if you don't mind, I'll rejig the agenda a bit. So that we start with this item. Given our manuhiri, our guests, mana whenua, tēnā koe Baden, te tiamana o tā tātou iwi Ngāti Kahungunu. We have councillors from Hastings District Council, from Napier City Council. We have Te Kupenga Hauora members here, Bev Mana Whenua. We have our coastal community from Clifton to Tanguil who are here for the item following Māori constituencies. But we are here today, I guess, to celebrate and acknowledge the achievements so far and to decide on our next steps in terms of Māori constituencies as our first item. So with that, can I please hand over to Te Wairama to introduce this item, then we'll take questions or clarifications from the paper, and then we will move into deliberations on our decision as a council. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe, Chair, mōrena councillors. On the 30th of July, the Local Government Amendment Act was enacted, and it amended the Local Electoral Act 2021, the Local Government Electoral Legislation Act 2023, and the Local Electoral Regulations Act 2001, and reinstated the ability for 5% of electors to demand a poll on Māori wards and Māori constituencies. It required councils to hold a binding poll during the 2025 local elections if a poll was not previously held when establishing Māori wards and constituencies. And it adjusted the statutory timeframes for local elections to give more time for the postal delivery of voting papers. The reason we're here today is that the Act also directs that the Regional Council must make an active decision to retain their Māori constituencies or to disestablish them by the 6th of September 2024. Due to the direct impact of the Local Government Amendment Act to those on the Māori roll and the limited timeframe for the Council's decisions, tangata whenua views were gathered by the Māori Committee in preparation for a special Māori Committee meeting on the 21st of August 2024. The committee received written responses and shared and discussed further feedback from their communities alongside the members of the Regional Planning Committee who joined the meeting. The Māori Committee resolved to recommend that the Regional Council retain the Maui ki te Raki and Maui ki te Tonga constituencies for the 2025 local elections. I also want to reiterate that on the 29th of May 2024, Hawke's Bay Regional Council submitted an opposition to the proposed local government amendment bill, stating that to suggest, because a binding poll was not held, the process HBRC undertook to establish the Māori constituencies was somehow inadequate and undermines the process of local decision-making. During the establishment of Hawke's Bay Regional Council's Māori constituencies, Maui ki te Raki and Maui ki te Tonga, Regional Council received more submissions than have been received on any long-term plan, and a resounding 89.23% of the 1,090 submitters supported the establishment of the Māori constituencies. Today's paper outlines the processes and options for your consideration, and the partai today is whether Council chooses to retain its Māori constituencies or disestablish it.
Kia ora, thank you for that summary. I'd like to hand over to you, Matua Mike, given you're the chair of the Māori Committee, and this was discussed amongst the Māori Committee and the Regional Planning Committee last week, which you have brought to our attention recommendations. So if I could please get you to speak to that hui last week.
Tēnā koe, Madam Chair. Ka mihi kia o koutou te whare nei. Ka mihi kia o koutou nā kānoi o tātou whānui, o tātou hapu marae iwi. Anā mahara mai, ko tēnei ko o koutou whare. Ka nui tā aroha, ka nui tā maioha i a koutou i tēnei wā. Ki te tautoko nā kōrero e pānga ki tēnei kaupapa. Tino hirera ki a tātou iwi. Te iwi katoa o tātou motu. Nō reira, nō mahara mai. Yes, Madam Chair. So as you stated, the hui last week was not only did it have our Māori Standing Committee, but it also had our Regional Planning Committee there as well. So it was a good representation of our Māori entities, bodies, and of course, like many of us, we also wear multiple hats. We don't just sit on those committees. We sit on our maraes. We te mea. So when we looked at who was in the room, it was a good representation of all of our whānau. And yes, we wanted to see the continuation of the retention of our Māori seats, because we believe that our two representatives from out of our Māori constituencies have demonstrated the value that they add to this table. We also believe that they bring a unique perspective of our Māori community to this table. The other thing is, by the council supporting the establishment of the Māori wards, you have whakamanat our kōrero and our whakaaro by allowing us to have the vote that tautokos what we had to say at this table. And that was always the most important thing for us in having these Māori wards established. Alongside the supporting of the continuation, the hui supported the direction that the Regional Council took in its submissions in regards to changes to the Act, and its submissions in regards to your continued advocation for the support of Māori representation and in opposition to the current coalition government stance. So we wanted to recognise that and support that position that Regional Council took. The other one was just in regards to, as we know, currently was amazing how quickly a situation changed just by changing the government. And we all understand that that can also change again in 2 years' time. And to be fair, we're tired of being someone else's political football. Hey. So we are actually asking that that Hawke's Bay Regional Council resolves to seek constitutional remedies and protections in regards to the continuity of Māori wards constituencies. So we're not subject to this every time there is a change of government. We're not someone else's political football to be played with. I think that's where our Māori, our hui landed. Those recommendations are not too dissimilar to what took place in Hastings District Council yesterday. And just like yesterday in regards to our Heretanga District, we're here to, our whānau are here to tautoko you, the councillors, because at the end of the day, it is you who make this decision, not us. And we're here today just to, our whānau come today to support you in that decision. So you know that you have the support of our Māori communities in the decision you have to make today. Nō reira, tēnā rā koutou katoa.
Oh, tēnā koe matua, Mike. Kia ora, Katarina. Kia ora, Tanya, for joining us online. Tanya is the co-chair of RPC. Would you like to add any further to Mike's kōrero?
Oh, ata Māori koutou.
Oh, your volume's quite low, Tanya. Are you able to turn it up any higher?
Let's turn it up in here last time around.
I don't believe the problem's at my end.
Yeah, ka pai, we can hear you better, so maybe at that volume. Ka pai.
Okay, ata Māori koutou, I want to tautoko the comments from Mike. I too participated in the hui of the Māori Committee, and the Regional Planning Committee, Tangata Whenua reps were also invited to that hui and able to share their views and also support the recommendations that have been made to the council. So I think in short, the value is pere ngātahi working together for the best outcomes for our taiao and our region. And the sooner we can get on with the mahi and stop worrying about the representation, the better that will be for all of us. Having said that, the only thing I'd like to add is that hopefully after a positive outcome today, the big task is how we together promote support for the Māori seats and greater understanding of what they bring and why they're important, so that our communities understand why we're supporting this. I think those are probably the main things I wanted to share today, but totally support the recommendations from the Māori Committee. Tēnā tātou.
Kia ora, Tanya. Tēnā koutou katoa. Do we have any questions for Te Wairama or points of clarification before I ask Baden to come in kōrero? Ka pai.
Do we want to use our co-chair if she had any thoughts?
Kia ora, Katarina, aroha mai. Would you like to share
Tēnā koutou, ata Māori. Just like to tautoko the kōrero of Mike, Rawa ko Tania. My extra add-on would be just for us to all remember the key words that he just recited to you about Te iwi Māori has just given you the mana for this kaupapa. And that's so important to us. So, yeah, so te mana o te taiao, te mana o te wai, we need each other. So that's all I'm going to leave with you today, councillors. Kia kaha, kia mai, kia manawa nui, kia matara. Kia ora.
Kia ora, kia ora. Actually, Baden, oh yeah.
Kia ora tātou. Tamihana tēnā koe i o kupu whakamoemiti, whakatau, ki te hunga kua tae mai nei tēnei rā. E te tuahine, hene wai tēnā koe, me te kaunihira, a kai kaunihira katoa, Ko haere mai nei ki te whakatauhia, tēnei whakatau nui whakahirahira. I support the recommendations of the Māori Committee. I wasn't at the hui, but certainly put our kōrero forward. We'd given submissions to the Select Committee around this. But what I did see yesterday in Here Taunga, with the likes of Councillor Watkins that supported, it was a unanimous support for Māori wards at Here Taunga. And to me, it's kind of the turning of the tide. And, you know, I've been in lots of conversations and debate at council chambers with Councillor Watkins in the past, and we were always had loggerheads around kaupapa like this. But yesterday, ko whakai katoa Here Taunga kia tūtū tonu ngā wāri Māori. And that's what I'm recommending that the regional council do. Why? Because there's nothing that happens in our taiao that does not affect us as Māori. Ne? The Gabriel response and, you know, all the rebuild work has hugely impacted us, our Māori communities. And what I'm saying is that having our Māori ward councillors at the table adds so much value to the kōrero. It brings the mātauranga tuku iho from our ancestors to this table so that you can make good decisions for the wider community. So 100% support the Māori wards continuing here in the regional council. I think our chair has shown strong leadership around ensuring that our people keep components of any long-term planning going forward, and that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be for the betterment of the wider community. So with that, taku mihi nei ki a koutou. Mā koutou tēnei whakatau engari from Ngāti Kahungunu iwi, me ona piringa katoa, kei te tautoko Marika, i tēnei whakatau kia tūtonu ngā Māori wards. Nō reira, huri no tēnā koutou, tēnā hui tātou.
Kia ora. Are there further questions to Te Wairama about the paper or the item? There are none. Ka pai. So we move on to deliberations, and our recommendations here are number 1, receives and considers this report. 2, agrees to the decisions are not significant under our criteria. However, we know these are significant decisions. And 3, accepts the recommendation for Māori, the Māori committees recommendations to retain Māui ki te raki and Māui ki te tonga Māori constituencies. So I would like a mover for that. Councillor Hokianga, and a seconder, Councillor Zan Harding. We also have 5, 6 and 7, which you're happy to also move, Councillor Hokianga and Councillor Harding. Kia ora. Me huatu te rākau ki a koe, Councillor Hokianga.
Just to be absolutely clear with our our manuhiri, e hara koutou I te manuhiri, e tangata whenua ke. Nō reira, tēnei ka tuku au te reo aumene ki a koutou. And to remind us that this was a direction from our coalition government, and there's lots of feeling, and I can see a lot of our whānau nodding in accord, that it's particularly viewed as an overreach of our government on local government decision making. And so to express the views of tangata whenua and also our tangata tiriti is that when we find ourselves in positions of influence, we must remind ourselves that we will not tolerate the erosion or the elimination of our status as tangata whenua or tangata tiriti, because it's simply mana diminishing. And so I want to, again, tuku atu nā whakaaro kia koutou, ko tai a tinana mai, whakakanohi mai, tēnei anō māua ko Charlie e whakakanohi mai I enei turu. E hara enei turu nā māua, nā koutou kē. Nā koutou kē enei turu. Ko tā māua mahi, te whakakanohi mai, ki te whakawaha I o koutou reo, rangatira. Orera, kua rangatira te rā, kua rangatira te rā, kua rangatira te rā, tēnā koutou.
Kia ora. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I'll keep my comments really brief because I know some of my other colleagues are far more eloquent and have some really good stuff to say. I'll just simply reflect that in some respects today feels to me a little bit like a performance review. I sit here as a councillor reviewing the performance of Councillors Hawke and Lambert. It's not my job to do it, but I'm forced into doing this. But what I do want to say is, Rawe, fantastic. Look, I've so enjoyed working with the two of you, and to be frank, I spend more time working with Councillor Hawke because he's my Māori councillor just as much as he is yours. What a fantastic asset. Look, and the word whakamana, that's really touched me today, that's a reciprocal. We whakamana Māoridom and Māoridom whakamana us through these positions. They're a resounding success. They simply make us more effective. They're the right thing to do. The bottom line is they make us more effective at our jobs. So, kia ora, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Kia ora, Councillor Harding. Councillor Martin Williams.
Kia tuatahi ina rangatira o ta mutu katoa, kano I te mihi. Tuarua ina kawana, hipu kei konei, ahana kia koutou. Tua toru ina manahiri kua tai a tinana ki tēnei hui I te kaupapa ko Māori wards, anu I te mihi manahau kia koutou katoa. Chair, what I want to say is going to start by sounding a bit negative, but I am going to turn to the positive. The legislation forcing our hand to either rescind Māori wards or to hold a referendum is an outrage. It's wrong-headed constitutionally, it's wrong-headed morally, wrong-headed factually, wrong-headed legally for this region, and wrong-headed on the merits. If I could just take each of those briefly in turn. It's wrong-headed constitutionally. An exercise of the kawana, undermining the guarantee that the rangatira will have a seat and a vote at the council table. And equally, or also, for intruding into the local government domain. So Wellington, get out of our lane. It's wrong-handed morally. It risks the Māori voice being drowned out again, as it has been, by a Pākehā majority since the 1860s in local government, an exercise in colonisation in its own right, which we simply perpetuate if we lose Māori seats. It's wrong-headed factually and legally. It imposes a mandatory referendum when previously there had to be 5% of electors demanding a poll, a sensibility filter out of the exercise, whereas we're going straight to it. It's wrong-headed for this region. It's the very last thing we need right now, with all our ratepayers saying stick to your core business as we build out of the cyclone together. Whakahiwi ki te Whakahiwi. The last thing we need is a referendum on such a potentially divisive issue, with the government creating a tinderbox of tension around race relations and pouring accelerant on it on a seeming daily basis. That is the context that we, our councillors, will be walking into next year's election, and I very much don't look forward to that, and yet I'm being forced to vote to do precisely that. It's wrong-headed on the merits. And we see, as Councillor Harding shared, we've got so much to gain from a guaranteed Māori voice with a vote at this table. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The only reason I'm going to vote for the option of a referendum is that if I abstain, I will leave my colleagues with the moral dilemma on their own. And if we all took that moral high ground, we'd be in default as an organisation, and obviously that's untenable. But this is not the end of the road. Far from it. I think it is our duty as tangata tiriti, as Pākehā, to explain to our communities, as Councillor Harding shared, why there is so much to celebrate through what Māori seats can deliver. And let's think of the Māori worldview that I heard Tanya and Mike mention. A long-term focus, mokopuna decisions for future generations, not just in a 3-year cycle. Putting the environment at the centre rather than the economy always first. Thinking of our responsibilities rather than our rights, our responsibilities to each other, to future generations, to our tipuna in fact. And putting the collective and the community first. And it is our duty, I think now, we must be charged of this, to explain to our communities next year and over the rest of this year exactly why there is so much to lose through the loss of a guaranteed Māori voice at the table. That's the first point. The second point to conclude is I think we need to lobby hard for the government to abandon the requirement before next year's election. I'd like to see a coordinated, concerted local government resistance to this, to stand up to the government and say, no, we're not doing it. And let's see who blinks first. Thank you, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor Williams. Any other speakers? Kia ora, Councillor Lambert.
Kia ora tātou. Tuatai, kia koutou, koe tāmai, namihi koutou. Ai, tēnā koe man, bono tō kōrero, e tautoka I te kaupapa nei. Ko tāku nei, kei hoki te whakaro ki te rangatira, te kōti. If we look back at te kōti's life, one thing he noticed, as well as any other Māori, how fleeting the laws of the land are. And he was that disappointed. Tangata whakapono ia. So he wrote, but he could see how people were changing the whakapono to suit themselves. So he took his religion back to the Old Testament. No one messed with the Old Testament. And he started there. He also coined the phrase, I'm sure we all know, ko te ture te mea anake e patua te ture. So it's only the law that can defeat the law. And we see yet again, the government is going to change the law. We all know that when we do our treaty settlements, there is an apology in there, and they say we are sorry. But when we try to say, well, and you will never do it again, that's never on there, because they can't control their descendants, or much like us, I guess, much like us. Things do change. So. So it's not much of a choice today. It's a lesser of two evils, but we look back on 2017 and the Kahunguni people consulted and all said that, let's have these woods. So I say, let's celebrate them to the very end. Then hopefully by then we will have found another way to, or someone will rescind it. There is a way that we need to rally around and get our people to vote. We are ratepayers, all of us, whether we live in Invercargill and our whenua back in Mahurangi or Tukimokihi, we are still ratepayers and we have a vote. And it is our challenge to get out there and use the law ourselves. Mā te ture anake e patua te ture. Let's get out there and vote, whānau. And in the meantime, let's build this kaupapa up a bit higher. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor Lambert. Councillor Curtis.
Thanks, Madam Chair. You'll all know the Muppet Show, and this, Matua, Mike and I are back here as those two Muppets in the And I just want to pick my my benchmate here up on a point around, if you like, seeking permanent position around the table. And while I support that and have for 20 years, there's something I want to say, and it's a bit of a challenge around this. What you don't want to see, and it goes back to the law must defeat the law, it's the law, is complacency. And I would hate to see complacency build up because we have permanent Māori constituencies around the table. And by complacency, I say the task for all of us is to challenge our two representatives who have done a wonderful job in the past since they've been around this table. It's been a pleasure to have Matauranga Māori well represented. But we also have a chair, a Māori chair, a wonderful progression from where we were a couple of decades ago around this table. So that's my point, is around complacency. Do not take it for granted. Use those positions well and advance them at every opportunity. So the challenge is not only should we have two Māori constituencies, but we should have Māori challenging, putting their names forward for those other seats. So we have more of them. So that also is the challenge in this equation. Don't take it for granted. Don't be complacent. Take the opportunities that are there, because as you've seen with a government stepping into play, you could lose it tomorrow if we sit back and take it for granted that they're always going to be in play. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, any further speakers? Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Chair, and tēnā koutou katoa to all our visitors today. I still remember clearly 2021 when we went through the process of establishing the Māori wards, and quite a process it was, and I think it was 2 days of pretty passionate submitters here, and overall a resounding 89, rounded up to 90% submissions. I think we've heard that somewhere before. But nonetheless, it was an occasion and a celebration. And I remember saying on that day, right, we've done that, now let's get back to the mahi. Because we had plenty on, and as a first-time councillor, obviously keen to get stuck in. And then fast forward a couple of years, and we got smashed. All of us, you know, in one way or another, got hit. And from the cyclone, and it's been really tough on communities right across the region. And so that mahi has just got 10 times, 100 times harder. And I feel since that time, you know, we as a council haven't been great in being united with all the different stakeholders out there. But that corner's turned, and I think the best thing we can do today is be united front. It's the only way to, I guess, tackle what's ahead of us, and the only way we're going to do that is being united with, you know, all our partners across the region, our communities, our other councils, our people. So for those reasons, I'll be supporting the motion today. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Ka pai. Right of reply, Councillor Hawke.
Just picking up on a couple of points that my fellow colleagues around the table have made, in particular about keeping the turu honest and keeping the turu accountable to our hapuri, to our constituents, to our whānau, to our hapuri, to our iwi. Further to the point of Councillor Williams regarding a pokohiwi ki te pokohiwi approach, no mairano awa kōrero, no mairano. Pokohiwi ki te pokohiwi, pakahiwi ki te pakahiwi, kanohi ki te kanohi. It's important that we take that approach, and I think about those that have gone before us and the work they have done, the courage of the previous councillors to initiate the ability for these two seats to exist. I remember the hikoi, or the protest, the ongoing protests that happened over a series of months, perfectly timed for when particular items were being discussed here in this chamber. I also remember and acknowledge the voices of our hapori, that when the opportunity came to make submissions, 254 submissions from Mangaroa Marae alone. And so just reminding ourselves that we've got a bit of work to do. We've got lots of work to do. And with the low voter turnout, me hoki anō tātou, tangata whenua, tangata tiriti, ki ngā rārangi pōti. Kia kaha ki te pōti. Rā, koe rā ngā ture o te kāwanatanga, amotu, koe rā ngā ture o mātou nei o te kaunihera o te mātaua Māui. O reira kia kahara, aki i a tātou ki te whai pōti. Pōti mai, if we don't get out there and vote, the results are going to be the same. So kia kaha mai rā tātou.
Kia ora. Kia ora. We've heard about the seats and we've heard from our Māori councillors, but these constituencies represent far more than just 2 seats. It is a vital link between this council and tangata whenua. The knowledge, experience and leadership of Māori communities are crucial to the well-being of our region, which is why we fully support and want to retain these constituencies for as long as possible, as well as investigate, as the Māori Committee have said, protecting them for as long as we can. And so that is the motion set at our table today, to accept the recommendation from the Māori Committee and retains the Māui ki te raki and Māui ki te tonga Māori constituencies. All those agree, say aye. Aye. Those against, whakamana, carried. Kia ora tātou katoa.
Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou e. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou e. Whai a te maramatanga, me te aroha e ngā iwi, kia tapatahi, kia patahia. Tātou e, tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou e. Tūtira mai ngā iwi, tātou e. Whai a te maramatanga, me te aroha e ngā iwi. Patahira, tātou e, tātou, pūritia kia mau, hia wahi, maringa, watarana, tūwa, ho, hoi,
Kia ora tātou, kia ora.
Hei whakamana, hei whakaturi, hei whakahariko. Tūturu mau ki a tina. Maumi e, hui e. Tāri ki e.
Kei te hāpuri o te whānau whero, tēnā nau koutou. Tā koutou ihi mai. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora. Oh, we carry on. Yeah, because... Of the agenda. There are no apologies for today. On to notices. As Councillor Hokianga acknowledged the sad passing of Kate Woods within our staff, I'd like us to take a moment's silence to acknowledge the sad time that her whānau pani, her immediate whānau, are going through, but also the sad time that has been brought upon staff. And so if we can please take a minute of silence to acknowledge Kate and her whānau. Kia ora tātou. Notices. Are there any notices for today? There is one from me. Today, some of our residents, ratepayers, who have been included in the new footprint of passenger transport will be receiving a focus letter just informing them of their eligibility for admission and the details in that letter. So we're glad to have got that out to them today. Another notice also is there was a memorandum of understanding signed yesterday between the Hawke's Bay Regional Council and Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, one of our post-settlement entity partners. That outlines the principles in which we will be working together, particularly in the planning and policy space. So that was a very momentous occasion, and we thank Tamatea Pōkai Whenua for inviting us into their office to celebrate that agreement. If there are no other notices, okay, kia ora. Are there any conflict of interest declarations to be made for today's meeting items? There are none. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes from the extraordinary Hawke's Bay Regional Council meeting held on the 7th of August. Are there any amendments needed to those? Councillor Harding, thank
Kia
you.
ora, Chair. Look, I just noticed that Councillor Foley managed to vote both for and against the recommendation.
Does that?
Right. Councillor Foley, would you like to confirm which one of you voted the right way?
That was 4.
Was that item 4?
Item 4, yeah.
Okay, I'll correct that.
You might be able to shed some light on that, Councillor Foley? No. Okay. Leanne, you can check. Thank you.
I think it was Councillor Williams that voted against.
Right, so there we go. That might be your solution. Thank you.
That's what he's telling me anyway.
We often get mixed up.
I know what.
Thank you. If we can have corrections to those. With that correction, are you happy to move, Councillor Harding, those minutes? And Councillor Williams, are you happy to second for that amendment?
No.
No.
Someone else do that.
Councillor McIntosh. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. We move on to decision item 5. So if I can please invite you up, Simon. Also, we have representatives here from Napier City Council. Deputy Mayor Annette Brosnan, would you like to join us up the front? And who would like to, Councillor Dixon? Yeah, I don't see Dixon. Dixon, please join us. Kia ora. Welcome. Another important decision to make today. And a long time coming for the work, the mahi, the community involved in the panel decision making. We welcome you to this occasion. So this is the Clifton to Tangoil Coastal Hazard Strategy 2120. So thank you, Chris. Mm-hmm. So many names to remember. Yeah. Chris, you'll lead us out, and then we'll have question and clarification time. But I'd like also to invite Yera Van Beek, our councillor and chair of this joint committee, who have done so much work to this date. So we'll open with you. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. So, Jeff, did you want to kick off?
I can. Let's do that. Get it out of the way.
Yeah,
and then it will become all very clear after that. So we all know the history of the Coastal Hazard Strategy, which has been always in draft. Now it's actually final, and at our last joint committee meeting, we agreed to make it final. And once again, our thanks went out to Simon Bendel, our hard-working Taupo resident, who's been there right from day one. And once again, we thank you for your leadership that you gave us in this whole process.
and we have got an amazing draft, but also I think thanks went out to our community boards, people along the coast who spent an enormous amount of time and interest in the strategy. And once again, of all the joint committees that we've seen, and we see again here today, they always have been very interested in what we do at a council level, at a joint committee level, and when we have community meetings. And our gallery on these most important meetings has been full, with very familiar faces of people who've got the coast at heart. The coastal community is an important community. They specifically, in most cases, you can't generalise, but they have chosen to actually live in the coastal area. And that comes, and it has come at a cost for them when they're purchased in those areas, either the distance that they have to travel to work because they're generally a way out, or the cost of the property that they've purchased. But unfortunately, with climate change and the hazards that we now face, this cost is actually going to continue annually. We know that the strategy will have funding required to be admitted to it so that we can protect these communities. So this is a very important strategy for them, and we need to take that in consideration. I believe that it is our duty as a council, but that's not for debate today, that we have a responsibility to protect. It's part of our core business to protect our community, whether that's a community that lives in the arm's length of a river or of the coast. That's part of our core business. However, today is purely about receiving the report. Then, if that is acceptable, we then, as a council, will have another discussion with the community to see where this strategy will lead. And this will be a difficult discussion to have at that time, and we as councillors need to fully understand, and I really encourage you councillors to take part in this and actually meet with the community and listen to their arguments and reasons for and against the work that we're about to do. Just my last comment is, and I made it at the last joint committee, this strategy is not a strategy that is set in concrete. This is a strategy that is adaptive, and it should be adaptive. As around the country, communities, we are struggling with coastal inundation, coastal erosion, and ideas and technology will come available, and whether it's nature-led or engineering-led, there will be changes that we can foresee with this strategy, and we should be brave enough to adapt them and know that we will adopt new strategies and ways to protect our communities. So on that note, I think I should pass back to you, Chris. And once again, also, I would like to thank you for the work that you've done, and especially also your technical advisory group that have been working so tirelessly to actually get all this work together, including the engineers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. So I'll just introduce some of the guests we have today and then maybe hand over for a few comments from our partner councils and also from our tangata whenua representatives as well. So, of course, this has been a great collaborative effort over 10 years. So it's obviously included the Hawke's Bay Regional Council, the Hastings District Council. So we've got Malcolm and also Hannah here from Hastings. Napier City Council, so we've got Keith and Annette here from Napier, and of course partnership with Tangata Whenua. So we've had the Mana Ahuriri Trust and Evelyn Ratama, apologies from her today, the Tamatea Pōkai Whenua, so we've got Noel down the back here today, and for Mangaharoru Tangatu, obviously Tanya. So wanted to really just introduce all of our guests today. We're happy to take you through the paper in detail. It has been a 10-year journey, and this is really the passing of the baton, so it very much is us receiving the report, and we know that we have a lot of work to do to understand how it may be implemented in the future with all of our other priorities as well. So, Malcolm, maybe just hand it over to you first for any comments.
Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
Look, I'm Malcolm Dixon, Hastings District Council. I'm here to just pass on a huge vote of thanks. This was probably one of the very first joint committees that included Napier, Hastings, Regional and Tangata Whenua, and it's been extremely successful all the way through. And it's had wonderful leadership. First we had Peter Bevan, and then we've had Jerif, and it's been tremendous. And the TAG team have really supported with the information they've offered us on a regular basis. So thank you to Simon and Chris and Phillips on the screen there behind us, but without them we wouldn't have had such success on the way through. As far as the community has been concerned, we've got a couple of champions here today. We've got Anne Redstone here, and she's been a real champion for the coastal hazards. And Keith Newman's another champion that's been out there, and they've really supported and they've wound up their communities to get in behind it, and we've all been very appreciative of that. As far as we're concerned, it's only the start of the relay. It's a 400-metre relay each lap, and we finished lap 1. So the baton changes now, and everyone will be looking forward to the completion of the next 3 laps, because it's going to be a long journey and it's going to be an expensive journey, but for Regional Council it's core business and it has to happen. So thank you one and all for your tremendous efforts.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon. Councillor Brosnan.
Morena koutou, everyone. Thank you for having us here today. I would echo the sentiments of my colleagues up here. I think it has been a massive journey for us to come together and produce this report and to the point where we are today, handing over to yourselves. I think the key messages from Napier and our colleagues, which everyone's done a lovely job of acknowledging everyone in the room, so I won't redo that. But I think the key message from us is just that we're still here to support. There is a role in the advisory panel for your TLA partners as we move forward in that relay race. And as we know, that climate adaptation work is not short mahi, it's not easy mahi, but it is mahi that is really important to those communities, not only on the coast but at large. So the work that's been done in acknowledging what I think is really special about the pathways you have in front of you for this work is that it's all been community-led as well. It's been supported and facilitated by these joint councils and mana whenua together, but it has come up from our communities as well. So it's been a really collaborative effort and something that I think everyone should be incredibly proud of. A big mahi to Jerif and Peter, your previous chairs from the Regional Council, on getting you to this point. I think it has been, and of course yourself, and more recently as well, taking over the work here. I think it has been incredibly important for the region. It's been trailblazing nationally, and I know as the government is looking to that climate adaptation policy space, that what we have done here in Hawke's Bay is an important part of forming up what that looks like nationally. So ngā mihi, thank you for having us here, and here to support going forward.
Kia ora, Councillor Brosnan. Tanya. Kia ora.
Kia ora anō, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yep. Tautoko all the thanks that have been mentioned today. I've been here since the inception. It's hard to believe it's 10 years, but I suppose this has been a really, apart from being a long process and a thorough process, I think it has been a really solid process, and I think the report that's being presented to Council today is an excellent piece of work that lays a foundation for what happens next. And for me, the working together, the inclusion of tangata whenua, the long-term horizons that we're working to, and the fact that these big issues, not dissimilar to the issues we're dealing with post-cyclone, are big issues that our communities and ourselves as governors have to tackle. And I think having started that out 10 years ago was probably leading the charge around the country on coastal hazards. And so I'm actually really proud of the work that the committee's done with the support of our technical advisors and Simon, you as our project manager. I'm really proud of that. We haven't always agreed, and we've had thorough debates on things, but that's all part of the process, and I'm confident that this provides the council with a great foundation to move forward. It's really important work, and I'm really pleased that it will be continued, and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council is going to be taking that on. So those are my comments this morning.
Kia ora, thank you, Tanya. We'll pass it back to you, Chris.
Thank you. Yes, I've got a few comments, and then probably just hand it over to Simon to highlight some of the key, key outcomes over the past 10 years, and then we're happy to have a bit of a question session, and then take it from there. So certainly, look, it has been a marathon. There's been a huge amount of people involved over that 10-year period. So a big thank you to everyone who's been involved. It really is a tale of two halves in terms of the first half was very much facing the community and working with our community panels, and in 2018 published the Pathways document, where through that collaboration with communities we put up the adaptive pathways for each cell, using a whole lot of criteria developed or co-developed with the communities. So that was a real great outcome back in 2018. Since then, we've been more inward focused, and of course one of the big questions was who should take a leadership role and how do we fund this sort of work. And so that's where we brought in Rain or Asher, because we knew that in legislation we had overlaps and a lack of clarity about who should be responsible for these things. So Rain or Asher KC came in not to interpret the law, but really to talk to everyone involved and help make a decision around how he saw things. And that really unlocked us to move forward to this point. And so since then, the Joint Committee's been very focused on things like triggers and also some funding models, and have come up with some funding principles. But ultimately, those decisions will need to continue at the Regional Council, because only the regional has the context of coastal hazards in relation to the total basket of work that we do. So the Joint Committee have made a number of recommendations in the paper, and they have asked that we receive the Clifton to Tangao coastal paper. So that's very important. We're not asking it to be adopted, it's simply to be received, knowing that there's further work to do. Also knowing that although the Joint Committee has worked through a lot of the funding principles, they need to be applied specifically to this Regional Council, so have asked to continue the journey on the funding model, that the Regional Council prepare consultation for community, a strategy for community consultation, and they have asked that that happen no later than March 2025. So that's the recommendation from the Joint Committee, and what we're asking today is to simply receive the report and task the Chief Executive with mapping out how the rest of those points can be achieved. So that's probably a high-level summary, and I'll just pass it over to Simon to take us through some of the key points I haven't covered.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Yeah. I was thinking there's little left to cover, I think. So look, I will keep my comments very brief on that basis, and perhaps just very practical matters. So on page 14 of your agenda, there's table 1 there with the memorandum of transition, which is still, I guess, a key guiding document for how this work's progressing and is intended to be developed and adopted by the council. I've highlighted there E, the grey bar there in table 1, which is our current work in progress, right? So that is still the plan, has been in plan since about 22 when this MOT was signed, and we're working to that program, albeit slightly delayed for the reasons outlined in the paper itself. Just one extra note on that, the asset transfer process has been debated many times at this council, I know. The paper makes the point that this is currently on hold. It is not a fundamental requirement for this work to be successful. It's administratively sensible in our view, but not a requirement. So for now, we've suggested that we park that work and revisit in future when the timing is right to do so. So other than that, look, I think it's all been covered ably by all previous speakers. So rather than go on further, I'm happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Hey, what a brilliant piece of mahi that this Joint Committee and the community has done, and thank you for bringing it to us in the form that it is in. And I do hope the Advisory Committee is the next step for the Joint Committee, I think. That's
Correct.
right, isn't
Yep.
it? We look forward to continuing to work with the advisory committee, and I guess it will be on the basis of asking for direction in some hard pieces or further understanding. Is that right, Chris?
So that's right. So so I think a couple of things there is first the joint committee stays in place for the foreseeable future. We have not shut, in terms of want of better words, shut the committee down at their last meeting. So
They're on hold.
They're ready to go should there be a purpose.
Yes.
But we do know that should the regional council fully accept this work and move it on,
Right,
that we do have the advisory panel in place.
Yes.
And so that's where we can continue to work collaboratively in that partnership for the further advice and detail. There is a draft terms of reference for that advisory panel, but that's also some work that we need to do going forward. But that's the intention of how we think it can possibly work.
Thank you, Chris. Questions? Councillor Williams.
Oh, thanks. Almost
Yeah, I just saw it.
horizontal,
Okay.
but I'll ask a question. Thank you. There's a couple exercising my mind in there immediately. One of them's actually almost for Katrina. I don't know if she's here, but
She is here. She
right.
is
Well,
here.
look, Action 5 in the strategy is to strengthen direction in the regional policy statement around a regionally consistent approach to risk management and risks of maladaptation. There seems to be a real resonance between that and the recommendations of the flood review panel, and we've got some, I guess, some advice from the staff about how that's being responded to in the next RPS review. The question is this part of that RPS review as well? Are we setting the scene or setting the stage to be able to consent and deliver the recommendations of this panel within our planning frameworks is the question.
Would you like me to
answer?
lead off that one? I'll start, and you can perhaps jump in if you'd like. So look, I think obviously this is a recommended document for now. So at such time as HBRC adopts it and then become part of the work program to move forward, it's the first point. But certainly the intention is that for the strategy to work well, it needs to go hand in glove with the regulatory response. So we're doing some work on the coast to increase resilience. That can't come at the cost of encouraging development, which then makes the problem worse down the track. So there's that need to go hand in glove with strong regulation to recognise things are still at risk, even with some more gravel or some groins. But secondly, recognising that at the moment we have a bit of inconsistency. So Napier has their version of rules for coastal hazards. Hastings and HPC are much more aligned. So a few things to iron out. So I think it's important that the physical works are progressed at the same time as a regulatory response, that they're sort of aligned and coordinated. As to when that would happen, and through the RPS, I'll defer to you, but certainly it's yet to be adopted, right? So this is a recommendation for now.
It is yet to be adopted. Everything he said is correct, which is, goes without saying. Our RPS draft, pre-consultation draft, will be ready in June next year. Absolutely, the team will be taking into account all of the work that has gone into this program. It would be unwise of us to do so, having 10 years of work here. So yes, absolutely, that will form part of the next RPS.
Thank you. It just seems so well aligned with what the flooding side of it.
Correct. It does coincide with some of that direction out of the HBIFR report. And picking up on those inconsistencies is really key across our region.
Thank you. One more question, Chair. I've spent a reasonable amount of time with Mr. Dallimore in recent years. To his credit, he's championed West Shore. Renourishment is the recommended short-term strategy as at 2017. It's now 7 years later. So we've got 13 years left of short-term. Question though, what does renourishment look like for West Shore? What are we doing now? What are we planning to be doing in the next 13 of the 20 years? And why does it differ from what Larry Dallimore thinks we should be doing?
Perhaps I could start and you can build on that. So I would describe the strategy as enhanced status quo in a way. So at the moment, there is sand that's deposited north from port dredgings, and obviously as we know there's ongoing gravel nourishment onshore. The strategy calls for the same, but in a more enhanced, I'd say, increased sort of a way to build up that resilience. So it's a combination of offshore sand and onshore gravel, as happens now, but sort of expanded. Important to note that's not consented yet, so that will go through a process to confirm if that's consentable and what conditions don't apply to that. How far south that sand may be able to come is a sort of a tension point. I know there's Rangatira Reef is critically important there, and the further south you get with sand, the more at risk that may become. So that's a debate to have through the consenting process. So that's the first answer, I think, is around what's proposed. It's status quo plus, if you like. As to how that relates to what Mr. Dallymore's been seeking, he'd need to answer that, but my understanding is it's largely aligned with what he's seeking. As my understanding is the uncertainty or the contention is more about the cause of erosion, less than the response to it.
Right. Thank you very much.
Other questions? I have another one. In our recommendations, the fourth is to instruct the CE to provide advice on the pathway to implementation, taking into account all of Hawke's Bay Regional Council's priorities. Can you just outline the pathways for implementation that we see in front of us that possibly the Joint Committee have already discussed in the last few meetings?
So probably at a high level, obviously there's a huge amount of background information that goes into all of the chapters in this summary documentation, and there's still substantial work to do around finalising a funding model, for example. So we see a pathway forward is a series of workshops with Council to really bring everyone up to the same level of understanding across the various subject matters from what are the proposed interventions, is there different views around that, understand where we might be in terms of triggers, understand where we are, understanding any environmental footprints. There's some Mātauranga Māori work that needs to be completed. So we'd basically have a number of sessions where we'd brief on all the various aspects. There is some hard work to understand how this work can be funded. It's obviously, it's not cheap, it is expensive work. There's no sort of silver bullet where the do nothing costs nothing, because the do nothing is loss and cost to communities and individuals. So it's really a gnarly problem. So the envisage take Council through a series of workshops, and so they can make firstly some guidance and get up to that speed, then go through a number of decisions, and then obviously on the capacity, so the organisational capacity and the rating impact, there's some work to do that's specific to the Regional Council about how that fits in with all of our other priorities. So again, there's probably some further Council papers for consideration and some workshops and to understand direction and priorities of Council. So that's a bit of a pathway, probably take 6 or so months, I would envisage, but that's sort of a possible way to move this forward.
Great. And we'll have Simon with us along that journey, and Philip Jones.
So we are, yes, certainly planning. Simon has 10 years history. He's done a fantastic job.
I don't think anyone
so
knows
at
it
this
any
juncture,
better.
Simon will continue to support the
Fantastic.
project, along with Philip, who's intimately knowledgeable around our rating systems.
Great, thank you. Councillor Sears.
I do have a question actually. Is this strategy the most advanced and complete and connected in New Zealand around coastal hazards?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I've got a definitive answer because there's lots happening right now in the space. Lots of councils are working on plans like these at various states. Just from my own personal knowledge of what's out there, I would describe this project as initially leading in terms of how to do the planning phase, and then a period of relative quiet while others sort of advance their work. But I think what is still leading in this region is the who pays and who does it questions, right? So that's been the focus for the last 2+ years. To my knowledge, no one else has signed an MOT like this project has, which sets out who will do what, and in principle agrees that the Regional Council will lead this. I think other regions are grappling with how best to answer that question. And in terms of the funding piece, from what I've seen around the country, lots of adaptation plans have been developed, but none have firm implementation plans that I'm aware of in terms of who pays for it and how to get it done. So it's a bit of a nuanced answer, but I think if this goes through next year, I think we're back at the leading stage again, with my view.
Has there been any investigation on the government's thinking or intention to help solve the who pays question?
I think the Joint Committee have certainly come up with a number of principles.
Yeah.
The challenge is they can only take that work so far because they're looking at this issue in isolation. So the only subject matter for the Joint Committee is the coastal strategy, and obviously there's a more nuanced approach in how that fits in. So certainly there's a number of principles around the beneficiary pays. And then again, quite similar to our flood schemes, where there's various levels of benefit, but that does need further work.
Okay.
Through the Chair, could I add to that briefly? I think there is a select committee inquiry right now, led by the Expenditure and Finance Committee, previously done by the Environment Committee and now which is a bit of a shift in thinking, I think. So they're meant to report back in October, I understand. So in the next couple of months, we should hear this initial report, and one of their questions of inquiry was that question. So we would hope to get something more concrete in October.
Thank you. That answers the question. Thank you. If there are no further questions, we have recommendations in front of us, 1, 2, 3 and 4. Mainly second, which is to receive the Clifton to Tangoil Coastal Hazards Strategy 2120. 3, notes the recommendations from the Joint Committee and instructs the CE to provide advice on the pathway to implementation, taking into account Hawke's Bay Regional Council's priorities. You're happy to move?
Yes,
Councillor Van Bake and Councillor Williams second. Would you like to speak any further?
I think I've said enough, and enough is being said. You know, it's well and truly clear what we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you. Councillor Williams?
Bring it on, let's do this.
Order. Any other speakers? Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think given my commentary over 10 years, it would be remiss of me not to make a comment. I think it's an extraordinary piece of work. It's a lot to admire in the work that's gone on over that period of time. Tremendous amount of technical information. I like mostly that it was community, rising up from the community, and the degree of assiduousness that's gone into us is really to be and it is nation leading piece of work. I like that hazards have been identified. I like it that there's a response, and we've got a strategy in play. They are really good things. The thing that concerned me throughout, though, is what does it do while we were looking out to sea, sitting behind, waiting for the tsunami to come our way. Sitting behind us was a tsunami behind our back, and that was on land. And that's my concern, was diverting our attention away from flooding, and unfortunately I think we did over that period of time. I'd love to have seen the same dedication and commitment to our flood zones as we've applied here. And I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have done the work on the coastal hazards. My concern is around that. The other concern I've got is around who pays and the fairness around that. And why I say that is that I would hate to be in the position around this table where we've got well-protected, resilient communities on the coast, but our communities in Piramai and Maranui are exposed. And in the last 4 years, I've walked through, and I know the Councillor Brosnan has as well, walked through the waters in our suburbs. And if our response is to rate and to put these structures in play to protect those communities, but the response to our communities and the likes of Piramai and Maranui is to issue them with gumboots, that's not okay. We do need to have this fair, balanced approach to this. And I'd hate for example, accepting, and I'm happy to receive the strategy today, but it comes with the proviso that we have a crisis on our hands in terms of affordability of the rates and whether there's an expectation that we'll deliver massive coastal resilience on day one, I think is just not reasonable. So they're the reservations I've got about this. There are reservations around protecting our coastal ecology as well, but that's another story. Happy to receive and report, have it tabled and brought in-house to the Regional Council, the appropriate body for it, but with the proviso that we will not be able to deliver on day one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin. Would you like a right of reply?
No, not that serious.
There are no other speakers. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anne. Lovely to see you.
Good night, Brian.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. We are a little bit early, so we will break now, and lunch should be here in a few minutes. Okay. Ka pai? Okay, thank you. Back to our Hawke's Bay Council Regional Council meeting. We are now up to item 6, the implementation of the recommendations from our review arising from Cyclone Gabriel. I'll hand it over to you, Nick, and the team to present the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. Paper in front of you really is a first look at recommendations arising from the independent flood review. I think council very openly and transparently asked for a review of all the issues around flooding as part of Cyclone Gabriel. Those are always really tough processes to go through, but it's always really important that whatever disaster collectively a region goes through, that you learn out the other side. So that independent flood review came to you at the end of July, I think July the 31st, and you received it at that point. So officers have had probably a couple of weeks between then and needing to have this paper finalised for you to give you an initial high-level assessment of the review. And that's essentially what this paper does. And the focus here is on looking to set up a reporting framework to come back to council, looking to understand how you want to monitor implementation of recommendations, and an initial focus on some decisions we're asking council to make around particularly those recommendations that deal with providing information and communication to the public to enable people to make the best decisions they can during an event. To do that work, just in terms of the team, Katrina has loaned 2 of her regulatory implementation staff to the process, and so we've reshuffled some things internally to do that, and I think that's an important way of approaching these sort of issues. So Louise McPhail, who you will remember from Cyclone Recovery, and Julianne McLean, who was part of our initial Cyclone Recovery Office, are spending at least a proportion of their time now helping us to beat this into shape in terms of a review, in terms of the review recommendations. And so the first stab at that in this paper, they've been instrumental in putting together in a pretty short space of time. I guess if you look across the range of recommendations in the review, some of them are very big and very broad and will take a number of years and potentially a significant amount of investment by this council on behalf of communities. Others are much more specific and are things that you can get on and do relatively quickly. I think when you've got a range of recommendations like that and recommendations that in places overlap each other, my suggestion to council is rather than you just accept them all holus bolus and then work out whether you can deliver them, actually all have them sitting there as a live set of recommendations that you work through and receive ongoing information and advice about, and you can then make decisions around them. And as I say, that 2 or 3 weeks between receiving the review and this paper being written, this is that first high-level go. I think in terms of looking at what's already underway, and I think really important to note that council hasn't sat around and not learned from what happened in the cyclone. So a number of the recommendations in the report have already been pretty fulsomely addressed. I think around 7 of the 40-odd recommendations were already in progress and completed. Another nearly 30 recommendations are either partially underway or underway in full. And then there will be parts of those broad recommendations that will need to come back, officers will need to come back to you for your guidance and decisions around things like priorities and funding allocations. That will go on over the course of the next year and into our annual plan, and I'm sure beyond that. So one of the things I'm really keen to establish with council is a regular reporting mechanism that you are comfortable with, so that we can bring that information back to you as you need it. So that's a kind of high-level view from me, and I'm just going to ask if any of the team want to add to that, or we want to open for questions, have discussion or questions.
Just want to thank the staff for bringing us this paper in a way that we can see what has been completed, what we're doing differently and improving on. Also those that we can get on with and we can prioritise, knowing that we can't do all of them at once, but also recognising some are funded, some aren't funded. So it's really a vision for us to look at what's coming up, what we want to implement that haven't funded yet. So thank you for being pragmatic in this way and allowing us to make these decisions on these important recommendations. Another point I'd like to make is with the reporting framework, I see this as an all-council having overlook of these important recommendations. So I'll just put there that I think it should come to full council, the monitoring framework and our ability to have oversight over that in council. So yeah, hand it back to you.
I think we're open for questions, Chair, as you wish, and absolutely take it as an action that will report back to full council.
Okay, any questions or comments? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've actually got quite a lot.
Yes.
How about I just bat through a few of the main ones for me,
yes,
and then see if my colleagues sweep up the rest. And again, yeah, I'm very grateful to see it in this tabular way. It's crystallised the thinking. The issue that is most interesting me is around the point that Kyle Christensen made, and Tonkin and Taylor did as well, about the need for predictability in the future design of our system, because at the moment you've got two stop banks at the same height. It's random what happens, you can't evacuate 100,000 people. So we need to be moving to a future where we actually know what's going to happen in an over-design event. Fewer people are affected, less infrastructure is affected, right? So hold that thought. But what I'm concerned about in the meantime is around recommendations 18 and 20, which are items 3 and 4, and I'm glad they're in the priority. And also, it kind of links to recommendation 1, which is, sorry, number 1, which is 15. We've got reference to management plans that are external facing, identifying trigger levels for known flood risk areas, and taking a precautionary approach using, you know, the correct language. Some of these items say they're going to take 0 to 3 years, cost $1 to $10 million, need a lot of further assessment. And the question I have is, do we actually have time to wait to have a better system of triggers and an understanding within the community of what they're likely to need to do when? Why does it cost up to $1 million to use different language in the way we communicate with civil defence, for example, on FBRC 20? So I guess my question is, could we not have an interim holding pattern approach to very simple understandings within parts of our communities that are most at risk? If rain is above X, flow level in river is above Y, get out. And just make that the holding pattern while we work towards that more predictable future. Question.
So, Councillor, I think you've described what our approach is. Certainly our approach is to quite quickly use the information at hand to provide that guidance. I think the second part of that, which is the more expensive and longer component, is actually consulting with communities about what those trigger levels should be, or how they experience different floods as input to that. I guess the other part of the question is are we looking at just the areas where we have flood control schemes, or all communities that have flood risk? And so this is why with a bit more time we'll effectively have a project plan against all of these, which will articulate what can be delivered in the immediate short term, sort of internally with information at hand, to be clearer with our communities, and then what is the longer term aspiration around that information. So I think that's why we've said that longer term aspiration is sort of 0 to 3 years and potentially over $1 million. But I also agree that we can, in less than a year, collate a lot of information we have, be a bit more directive, less consultation, and actually improve from our current base.
Yeah, like even if it's on an interim basis and it's overly precautionary, perhaps we'll cry wolf a few times. My other question, I think it's probably predictable, again going back to predictability, is do with the ESC. And on page 26 of the paper, if the recommendation 7, by way of example, the Esk River mouth, the interaction with the adverse coastal conditions is likely to increase flood levels in the lower reach of the river. Over the page 32, noting the 2022 flood event would have changed the riverbed levels in the lower Esk River were noted as locations where specific actions were needed. During Cyclone Gabriel, the Esk River was at least partially impeded. This is a community that doesn't have a flood bank and it's probably never going to work. But there is, on page 84 of that report, a recommendation about if you can't deal with it in that way, maybe some interim interventions in that river mouth are warranted. The camping ground owner saying nothing's changed. What can we change so that that community feels safer in a hurry while we work this through?
I think that the parts of that question is an overhaul of those trigger levels and the public-facing component of our information. So that's one thing that we are planning to change. And for that location, we already have quite detailed hazard maps of the flood hazard. The other thing that we've done is received advice on optimising the management of the Esk River mouth. And so staff have been asked to incorporate that advice into our standard operating procedures for the Esk mouth. So that was some work that was initiated through the Whirinaki Panpac when they got a head start on that Category 2C work. So Tonkin and Taylor did some work, so we're incorporating that. And I think the other recommendation is how we allow effectively for debris and debris dams or impacts to discharge areas through our modelling. So that's something that we need to work through and is quite challenging in terms of how you do that technically with consistency. So I think there's some things we have done. We've spent a huge amount of money in the Esk getting a lot of those drains operating properly. There's been a huge effort in terms of silt and debris. So I think often in the time it doesn't seem like a lot is happening, but if you reflect back, opening the drains time and time again, silt and debris, the Esk scheme has a budget of $20,000 per annum, I think. It's effectively a vegetation management. So there's a lot of pressure on our staff who are given that budget to manage a scheme to a certain outcome that doesn't necessarily match with the expectations of the community. So we need to work through that as well. So I think quite a lot has been done, but we certainly need to continue.
Thank you, Chris. And partly I asked the question was to give you the opportunity to say what you've just shared. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. And look, through you, this is probably a question for Nick. And it's about how we intend to communicate our progress on response to the independent flood review to the public. And the two parts to my question. One is, generally speaking, and what I have in my mind anyway is some dedicated pages on our website so that people who are interested, and there will be many, can monitor progress. But the second part of that is the evidentiary component. So when we're saying we've done something, that people can follow up and see the information that sits behind that. So my question is, and my plea is that we could incorporate that. So as we tick something off, say we've done it, here to the greatest extent for posterity for those people who are interested. Now, here's a reference. Here is a link. And the classic example on item 5 and table 3 is around resurveying river channels and having a prioritised work program to bring up service levels. And that's the kind of thing. So if we've got a work program, let's have it available. You know, can we daylight that survey information? It will just make our communication so much better, and also from a governance point of view, it will give us more oversight, more clarity, more confidence. Thank you.
Absolutely agree, Councillor. So that's essentially, after getting this paper written, one of the next steps for us is thinking how we do that. And I think our thinking's entirely aligned on doing that. And as a small example, I think some of the work that Councillor Roadley and Councillor Lambert asked us to do around New Hawke was kind of an example of getting those practical things out there. So yeah, it's really important, and I think pictures speak volumes. So where we've actually got pictures of people doing that stuff and evidencing it, it's a really helpful thing to do. Maybe the next paper we outline that for you.
Thank you. Councillor Van Beek.
Yeah, once again, it's great work to actually see this in a really clear format. One part that I do miss, however, is I would like to see I call it an urgency in my initial response is what is the urgency about each line so that we can see if we're actually hitting, because we're very busy, and I understand you're very busy, but are we doing the most urgent stuff first? And can we see that? So I would like to see that actually as in this correspondence, so that when we get updates, we can see it, where we're at and where you're actually facing and doing the work, which is quite important. And that's a little bit what really Martin was focusing on as well. Because what has changed, and people in the community will find that difficult, so that we can actually relate to them as well, where we see the urgency, where we're working on, and what they can expect. And thank you for Martin as well explaining that the 10 to 30 actually means years. It's actually not months. So I wasn't quite sure, but so that's what it is. Would be great if it was months. We'll get the work done a lot quicker. So, and I've got another question, but I'll let other councillors go first.
Thank you. Just on the urgency question.
Yep, I think
adding that to the
we can see what we can do with that, and I think that what we've brought you, recognising that building things takes a long time, but that providing people with the best information to enable people to make their own decisions is something that we should get on with as fast as we possibly can. And I think we all know that we can have the best warning system in the world with civil defence, but actually if people are empowered to go, well, actually I'm feeling nervous now, so I'm leaving, that's a good place for us to get to in any situation. So whether that's cameras on bridges, whether it's some of the flood management plans that Chris has talked about, we're suggesting those as priorities because you can get on with them while building takes 5 years.
So just wanting that clarity. So we're talking about priorities, and I think it is that health and safety being that priority first. So for warnings, for monitoring, messaging out, you know, those don't take a lot of investment. The investment's already been made, but it's ensuring, I suppose, that the practices and processes are at the best. I think it's coming back to what Councillor Hardy, how do we communicate that out? Because I think that for a lot of our whānau that were affected directly by those floods, that's their biggest fear. They'll get caught again.
Councillor McIntosh.
Yeah, can you help me with this? If we had another Gabrielle, then, and let's assume our warning systems were bang on, and so although the forecast was wrong, our warning systems were right. And let's assume the public was 100% educated on what they needed to do in a trigger situation. Then with a Gabrielle, given the widespread nature of it, what's vexing me is if I'm one of those, the educated public, then if I live in low-lying parts of Havelock, if I live in Hastings, if I live in Flaxmere, if I live in low-lying parts of Napier, big chunk of Waipawa and Maipukaro, certainly Wairoa, I'm out of there. But the report alongside that has said you can't evacuate 100,000 people if I'm looking at this catchment here. And so what's kind of vexing me is we're fixing all this stuff, but it's bringing about a situation which actually isn't practical to give effect to. Arguably, if everyone had jumped in their cars on February the 13th, it would have been worse, because you would have had a whole lot of people trapped in a traffic jam with 2 metres of water going through. So, you see what I mean?
So I would agree. So we talked about the option of developing trigger levels and messaging to communities, and that's why we've said on one hand we've got this very short-term piece of work, but as you've explained, the notice period that we get for the water coming down, we've got relatively small catchments. It's not like in Canterbury where we have a day's notice. We've got hours of notice. In some of those areas, people need to mobilise in those hours, and so part of the trigger is what are the preemptive triggers, because if you wait till it's happened, it's too late to evacuate in many cases. And so this is why we've said it could cost us quite a lot of time and quite a few dollars to work through all those bigger issues. So this is why it's a gradual thing. Get better comms of what we know now and self-service texting systems and all sorts of things like that. But there's some big complex issues. If we were to have another Gabriel and we hadn't reimagined our network, so we didn't know where that over-designed water was going to go, at what point would we sound the siren, knowing that it takes 12 hours or 24, 36 or 48 hours to effect an evacuation? And these are really quite gnarly questions.
That's my point, really. Yeah. If everything was working outstandingly, bearing in mind we couldn't rely on the forecast, we're just relying on what the rain is in the upper east to tell us. So we do it. You know, in an absolute best case scenario with Gabrielle, we might have said to people at 5 p.m. on Monday night, or people might have said to themselves if they were educated, we need to get out of here. But the trouble is, Gabrielle was very widespread. We had no idea, A, what rivers were going to pop, and B, where they were going to pop. So we would have said to people as part of the education, need to go. It would have probably created a worse situation because you've got a whole lot of people in cars who... So where I'm getting to with this is I agree with this because it's an important thing to do, but it is predicated on the floods being quite localised, otherwise it becomes impractical. And so we need to have a hell of a lot of emphasis, and maybe this is a short-term thing for a start, an interim thing for a start, which to Martin's point is to give some predictability as to where the water's going to go in an over-designed event. And so if it happened in a year's time, we've got some sort of plan for that which says, look, if it's looking bad, we need to blow a bank here, and we need to blow a bank here, and it's going to go in this area, which is reasonably sparsely populated, but we're confident we can get people out of there in time. But at the moment, that seems to me to be a missing link in the puzzle, because if we had a Gabrielle 6 months' time, and if all our telemetry and so on is working perfectly, and if the public was educated, very optimistic, we've got a big problem still. So I feel that we should have a contingency interim thing in place to be able to accommodate that sort of situation. Does that sort of make seems obvious to me, but...
Has it been identified in any of the immediate recommendations?
No, it hasn't. And there's probably not the time and place to have this discussion, but there's a lot of challenges with that approach. So just reflecting back, I interpret what you've said as we should have a number of sacrificial areas that we would preferentially flood if we know an over-design is coming. And to me, that's a very challenging issue to resolve within the community. And although it didn't happen in Gabriel, the thought of it even happening caused great consternation. So we're sort of got, we need to go through that process for reimagining our flood resilience. And we know that potentially will take a long time and be a complicated process, and there's lots of trade-offs and stuff. if we almost try and so I don't know how we would do a process with the community to have a plan that's approved or accepted, because it's almost the same as the reimagining. So I think it's a great point, but it's also a risk appetite. What risk do we take on while we're doing all of this work? Because it's almost a quick and dirty, a quick discussion with the community and also a longer term discussion with the community, both of which would be extremely challenging given where the opportunities are for detaining water.
Sorry, can I have one more back up to that, Chair? An example would be for Walker Road, probably saved a lot of people and distress in the lower Tukituki. So it was a relief valve.
Yeah. I think for Central Hawke's Bay in a predominantly rural environment, those options are a lot easier. Yeah. I think I would think if we were to make those decisions ahead of Tonga, how would we go about that conversation with the community? And we can do some more work offline, but I'm just highlighting it's almost replicating our reimagining process in Heretaunga, but I understand the risk that you're talking about.
Yeah. It's probably pertaining to jobs.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I think you raise a really good point, but I think you start at the top of the Himalayas. I think, why don't we, and Martin calls it quick wins, and we all have agreed those are actually very pertinent at the moment. So why don't we model, and the flood review report talks about it, and you talk about it in here, it is in here as well, where we model X amount of rain in this catchment, and then we see flooding happening, and our staff can do that. And you then add more water and flooding happens, and then you add more water and you then come to an over-design and it goes over the top. But it only has to be 5, if it remained 5 centimetres or 50 mil over the top of where I live, and we didn't have a huge shingle pole carving out the stop bank or whatever the forward drivers had done, the 50 mil would have been going for days without a problem. But just take away the issues about forward drivers and the shingle pole. But if we can model that, and we actually then give advice, not even to just the learned observers in our community, but everybody in the community. As I've often said, if Koblenz, which came out of Germany, the Rhine was at a certain level, my father would clear the farm, because that was the trigger point. These things we can do. We've got the technology, a quick win, and also the community can see that if this happens, I can get out of harm's way. Because it's not going to be, hopefully, a weather bomb like Gabrielle. There will be something happening between now and what happened in Gabrielle and what Gabrielle could look like, which is a lot less severe, but still severe enough to be an over-design. So I think that's the modelling we should be doing. I don't think it's one of these urgent things that we need to do. It will bring the community on board, understanding that they actually can then see what the issues are at certain levels of rain. And predictions are always hard, but hopefully with the telemetry that we've got in place, which I know are a lot safer, not washed away by bridges, we can see that, a real life. I can see on a quarter of an hour basis what level my Raupari stream is at if I need to put water in or out, So I think we've already been to the moon, supposedly. We can do this here too. So I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, adding to that is bringing some daylight to the process in which we're working on these quick wins or harder wins, so that it's communicated and almost acknowledged from the community's perspective on what we're doing and trying to achieve. So just adding on to Councillor Van Beek's point. Councillor Sears.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the discussion we're having is sort of part of my comment, which is this organisation could be involved in almost one of these projects as our work for the next 3 years, and there's probably 10 major pieces of work that we're approaching. And yesterday, Chief Executive and our Chair and the executive team presented to Hastings District Council, who'd asked for a catch-up on the work we're doing and what we're engaged in, and particularly around the $250 million bill package that'll be going on for the next 4 years. And actually, anyone is listening, to this. It's a very good presentation. Go back and watch it on Hastings District Council if you want to get an overview of what we've been engaged in. And Chris gave a good walkthrough from this rapid repair post-cyclone into the $250 million work program that we're now actually going to start turning soil on this summer, and the speed of that work, but then talked about what the future imagining coming out of this flood review and our climate resilience, where we're going with this. And I was quite overwhelmed actually by seeing it from the outside in a way. We're 18 months since the cyclone, and the work that's been done, it actually astounded me that this organisation's been able to do that. And I wondered, reading through this and making my notes and all this work and my list of all the things that I think we need to do, I actually wondered if we're in accommodation syndrome, you know, where we've been not boiling like little frogs, and actually not realised how much is going on and how much is being asked of our next steps. Because what I heard from the councillors there yesterday was, oh, great, and you're going to build those. But what's the big picture? Where are you going? When are we going to start to see, you know, the real future? Because everyone's moved on. We've got the 250 million. Great, you're going to do these projects, but actually we have to build them and monitor them and make sure they're done right, etc., etc. We've still got a big work stream in front of us. So where that led me to was this piece, which is probably what interests most of our community, which is recommendation 3. I won't read all of it, but just for those who haven't got it or people online. This is discussing this room for rivers, when we're designing our new flood management systems, the room for rivers, the concept of the spillways, all these big picture items that are coming towards us from the future. That's what our community is most interested in. And in our last, I think it was full council meeting, you brought the straw man for how we're going to go out to the community and start to engage in this. And we've had some talk as councillors around the type of approach we'd like to take with that. And I have a feeling that a way that we could help as governance is to maybe pick up some of these pieces, even though the reporting will come back here. Mm-hmm. If we can take small pieces ourselves to be working on particular areas within our own committees or with our community. And this one would fit very nicely into the EICC chair, mm-hmm. to work with Chris and the team on the engagement team on our next steps and being at least able to say to our community, this is the process that we are walking towards. This is what's coming next year, so that they understand our process for actually moving into the future. And I think if we could, we have an EICC meeting in 2 weeks actually, Chris. I think if we could bring something quite quickly just around the process that we might start with, that could be a really useful part in leading out on all the issues that come out, because we can speak in our community. But that actually leads me to my question, which may well be for the Chief Executive. Actually, as I say, I'm incredibly impressed with the whole organisation when I look back on the work and what's being achieved. I actually have real questions about the capacity and capability now around, you know, what we're going to ask for public engagement is really another whole work stream that we're not set up to do. We've got huge rating pressure. The community's very clear to us that they can't pay any more rates, but they also absolutely need to be right in partnership with us. I know we've just had some new funding announced from government last week that could be a resource for that. So I'm really just checking back in with the Chief Executive if you think what we're talking about and the suggestions we're making here are possible, and if not, how are we going to meet that challenge?
I think you identify, Councillor, a really real issue here, is in that, you know, in all of our hearts, I think we look at this and go, we'd like to do all of these now, and but there's a real reality to what any organisation can get up and deliver. And in my head anyway, I think how we're suggesting to you we're prioritising this work is we have to do the iwi work for those communities to be able to move on from being in Category 2. That's an absolute given. Those people at the moment have no flood protection and they live in a place where there has already been a significant threat to life, because if we don't get them to Category 1, they go to Category 3, which says those areas are very vulnerable. So absolute issue number one to deal with that. If I look at the flood review, and this was the discussion I had with the team recently, giving people information is really important, and I agree with Councillor McIntosh, that's really hard if you're in the middle of the Heretaunga Plains, because you've got 100,000 people there, but there's also another 70-odd thousand people all around the region who also can make those decisions about whether they want to move in a big storm. So we have a fundamental role in providing intelligence to the local councils and civil defence about what they then do with evacuation. So we need to get the intelligence provision that we make as good as we possibly can get at, both to those institutions, but also then to individuals. And that's no different to what we do. If you take the long and strong, get gone message, we don't all have perfect evacuation systems for that, but we know that we have to do something in that situation. So that, in my suggestion, is a critical next step. And then we've got this much bigger one around reimagining catchments and how we deal with over-design events. And if you ask me as the CE to deliver all three of those things to you at once, we'll fail on all three of them, being really blunt. And that won't get our community anywhere at all. So I'm absolutely happy to take direction from council if, how we balance those up. That's your role as governors. But I do think we have to be really clear that there will be things that we can do and we should get them done and do them well, and then things that we won't be able to do, and we won't be able to manage every risk to public safety everywhere in the region all at the same time. And I think we just have to be honest about that. And one of the things that for me has come out of all of these reviews is that for whatever reason over time, and I'm as bad at it as any member of the community, we get complacent about somebody's built me a stock bank, or there's a civil defence operation over there, somebody's got my back. Ultimately, there's a degree of personal responsibility in this stuff as well. That is a really tough message to communicate. So long way of saying, happy to take your direction, but we do have to, I think, be very deliberate about what we can and can't do, which is why this is a first early go. There'll be some one-pagers to come back to you, and if you don't like the order it's going in, or you think we want to reprioritise that, absolutely keen to take your direction. If in the annual plan or the annual plan after that, there's a priority in some of this stuff and we need to think about what the community might want to buy that priority or not, or a changed level of service, that's the discussion that happens through that process. Because ultimately this all does come back to levels of service and the community agreeing we're prepared to buy or not a variable level of service. So long-winded answer, but
yeah, thank you.
That's
Isn't first and foremost for me personally is keep me safe. It's the first thing that is a priority that we cannot get about. We can start building and putting spillways in, but if we haven't got a system to keep me safe, because I can always jump in a vehicle, I can jump on a tractor as we did and get out of harm's way. And I think we can do more than ours. We can do better than ours, and we should be able to do better than ours. And I think if it's only ours that we can give people advance warning, then our system is not good enough and we should do better. But to keep us safe first is an urgent priority that we need to work on. I think that is one of the cheapest and quickest way to do, and that will be a quick win. And Dan, the camping ground man in Esview, he already was gone, I think the Friday afternoon, because he had a system in place. I think out of all those who were being affected by Cyclone Gabrielle, he was the only one with an evacuation system in place, and that actually worked effectively.
And I think safety with awareness and knowledge of the risks in the what-if situation.
Yeah, you make
And
that,
knowing-
like
yeah,
Nick said,
and-
you make that personal decision on what to do. But you need to give the information, the data.
So Nick, what you're saying is what you've recommended to us, based on Sophie's question, is around, you see that the organisation has capacity and the finance in what you've recommended to us and the capability to deliver, which we will monitor through the framework.
Yes, that's correct, but it will take us more than the 2 weeks to go through it in more detail and then go, here's some more packages, and you can choose to prioritise or not those packages, pay for them, divert other work. Those are all choices ahead of you as councillors. But we wanted to give you a first cut really as quickly as possible after the review, because actually there is good stuff going on, but also to demonstrate we haven't just received the review, put it in a kitty and then left it on the shelf.
Yeah. Councillor Curtin.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I want to ask a question that tacks on to Councillor Sear's line of questioning as well. Just going to, and this is a question, going to the column estimated cost range. I'm just troubled to try and understand that one. Is that cumulative? Do I add all of those numbers up to get to a big number? You do? Have we done that?
I think the short answer is yes. The guidance is really of the nature, is this a small cost, a medium cost, or a really big cost?
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of precision around.
No, not necessary,
but as a guide, you would potentially add, or it's additive in terms of those costs.
So we're talking hundreds of millions.
Significant. Yeah.
So that's where I was coming from, really. So thank you for the answer to the question. I just want to comment now. An excellent piece of work. Lots is going on, as Councillor Sears has said, and a heap of work going on, both at an operational level and a planning level, etc. So really appreciate that. My concern, though, is that we can tick box 49 recommendations and no one will care much, really. And I say that, all that wonderful work we do, where does it go? And it gets back to, I think, Councillor Van Beek made the observation, is my community protected? So that's where I start, is to say, is it protected? So that's where we're going. We know what the numbers look like, they're massive. So in my view, the work program that is paramount is conversing with our communities to get them, one, to understand what that looks like, and to assess the appetite for funding it, and what does that whole environment look like. So I appreciate the work program's gone there, but my view is that the real work program, the work program that we ought to prioritise right up there is what are we going to say to our communities? The sooner we say it, the better. And it gets back to your reimagining, Chris, is when we talked about that during your presentation in July. We're now at the end of August. When we need a work program that really focuses on that, and by October, end of October, we've got something to go to our communities to start to converse on. So my question to that is that real? Can we do that? How do you see our capacity and capability to make that happen?
So I think there's two components, because I think there's two bits in there. So one is engaging with communities around triggers and signals and whether they're hitting the mark.
Yeah, that's sort of down there.
Yep. The second part is how we engage with communities on reimagining what flood resilience looks like, particularly around our two big schemes. So I think there we've socialised that straw man here and asked for feedback around how we progress that, and I know there's some feedback has been provided. We've started socialising that framework with our councils. So Hastings yesterday, we're off to Napier on Thursday, we're off to Central Hawke's Bay later in the month. And so you're right, we need to assemble. And so what we've said is we'll gather that feedback and assemble a bit of a plan towards the end of this calendar year. It could be a little bit earlier. And then it's understanding, I guess, acceptance or endorsement of that plan, understanding how we fund that plan, and then we move it forward. And whether that suggested runway into the next LTP is roughly right, whether we want to bring it forward, and let's just balance that tension between engagement and time and that sort of stuff. So that's the plan, is we got some feedback here. I know there's lots of nods in the room yesterday from Hastings when we invited some feedback. So we need to build that straw man up a bit more, and then launch off and work out how we're going to deliver it. I think it is going to be big. We are going to need some help with some expert resources to help facilitate that. And also acknowledging that in terms of our technical resources, they're also doing all the other work as well. So it's almost keeping our technical resources out of that engagement process as a separate work item, perhaps. So that's sort of thoughts about where I think that's sitting.
I think it goes back to Councillor Sear's request for EICC to bring some daylight to the model. We'd really, councillors are in the space to really advance our thinking in that space so that we can move that forward a lot quicker. Tanya, sorry, you had your hand up, but it's down. Kate Pai? Okay. Councillor Williams.
Kate Pai, thank you. All I was going to say was I was pleased to see that there's still ongoing support for the Category 3 matters, albeit that work stream is not being led by HBRC. I'm talking about the recommendation on the independent review around supporting the two marae who are Category 3 to relocate. So I just wanted to say it's good that it's still in there, albeit that HBRC is not leading it, just because it's challenging to get traction in that area. So the more our local councils and the regional council are supporting that work to be resolved, the better. So thank you.
Kia ora, Tanya. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think where this is all going to in terms of the conversations around the table and the questions is being absolutely clear right now with our communities around priorities, staging and sequencing. In other words, this isn't all about hui. We can't do all of the doing at once, but here is the Gantt chart. And so we have done the rebuild. Incredible, actually. Stage 2 is the biggest infrastructure project rollout this region's ever seen. We're doing that. Stage 3 would be, I think, and I endorse the priority on the 4 recommendations around triggers in education, around risk and immediate response for an interim, even in a holding position. And I would put in that mix of stage 3 some of the quick wins that have been identified, whether it's something at the river bar of the Esk or at Te Wanga or at some culvert, that's of concern within our communities. But then there is the big stage, stage 4. And that is the making room for rivers, that is the reimagining, that is the floodplains, that is the ultimate predictability of the design of our system. And if we explain to our communities with that Gantt chart model on a very simple piece of paper, these are all the do's, and in the meantime, we're going to be talking to you about that long-term future. That won't overburden this organisation because we're actually doing a lot of that stuff, all right? And we have that immediate engagement with the communities on the long-term future while doing all of that. They can see it in a picture, they understand the sequencing, they understand the priorities and the staging, and they understand the long-term vision. You could put it on a page. So that's what I'm really thinking this comes down to. I do think, that was really a wrap-up on that. I probably had a couple of other questions, but they're pretty pointy-headed.
So just to be clear, for recommendation 4, you'd like to include from the independent flood review recommendation 3.
Well, I think you need a communication and engagement strategy, and that's what Councillor says. We immediately shape and size how we're going to roll that out alongside those 4 and alongside the NEWI project, so that these things are progressing in parallel and people understand how they all line up, sequencing, staging and priority-wise.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, it was line of questioning follows on from probably Councillor Curtin and Mr Dolly's response. Normally with this kind of review, one of the most immediate responses from the organisation we reviewed would be a statement around acceptance or otherwise of the findings of the review. I'm just trying to understand whether we see that as a discrete part of the process. So I understand that there's a lot of kind of staging and investigation to do and scoping for some of these. But are we going before that to get to a point, and it doesn't seem to be that we're doing this today, of saying, yep, we've heard 47 recommendations and we accept 46 or 47, or are we going to do that?
I'll hand that over to our Chief Executive.
My suggestion, Councillor, is that at the moment you create potentially a false expectation that we can do everything in here. I think you've received the report and all the recommendations, and it will take a bit of time to work through each of them in enough detail to know if you want to accept or not all of them. I think what the community is really looking for is as councillors have described, what are we doing first and how much are we doing it and where are we doing it and can we talk about it eloquently and adequately. There's nothing in here that is completely silly in terms of a recommendation, but some of them come with a lot of money and some of them kind of overlap each other. So my suggestion would be actually we just get on, work through the ones that are a priority, and then probably 12 months into this process, you kind of go, well, actually, 25 of these are still relevant, 12 of them are less relevant, and one of them actually didn't prove to be as useful as we thought. So rather than accept the whole lot now, you work through them in a priority order, and then at some point you review them and go, well, actually, 90% of them are great, 10% of them we'll probably never do. And that's quite a common way of working through big reports, is that you kind of report back a year or 18 months down the track on the number that were significant. But ultimately up to council.
Councillor Harding?
Yeah, thank you, Nick, for that response. I think we probably need to spend a bit more time on this, because I think, and it comes into the important signalling, public signalling about what's our response to this report, what are we going to do? At some point, I think we need to make a discrete decision about whether we're just going to roll on in that fashion, which has less certainty. I would love to be able to separate out the commitment to the principle versus the time frame for action and paying for something. And I'd like to think that we could just say, look, we accept that all of these, we've already noted, for example, that one probably is not our bag anyway, that it's probably not us, it's probably Crown that's implemented there. So I just think it would be, if we can just keep that on the table as an idea that we should just think a bit more about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harding. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think just taking on board everything that's been said and reading the report. It is about staging, but staging blocks of work rather than do this or do that. I think it's that health and safety stuff first. It is that warning stuff first. How do we make people safe in their homes in regards to the monitoring that's been done, the communications in regards to they need to be prepared to move. How does that get out to them? Who's going to tell them to move, that they need to move? All that, I think, needs to be worked through. That's not a huge block of work, to be honest, and it's not a huge financial commitment. Yeah. When it comes to the engineering and the reshaping, but potentially of our waterways, that is significant work. We're talking decades. And we're talking decades in, so how do you communicate that across? Because they're going to look and say, well, I want that done in the next 2-3 years. Well, that's not going to happen. The reality is some of the stuff has taken decades to create the stock banks that we do have. So to think that we can suddenly just turn that around, because the other part of that is the hundreds of millions of dollars that will be required. Pull those off. So I think, for me, the councillors and council have to determine what does those engineering changes look like going forward? So we have restored the riverbanks back to the condition that they were, well, hopefully back to the condition that they were prior to the cyclone. We've received funding in regards to priority areas from out of Crown. So if you like, that work needs to get done. It's what's going to be new? What's going to be the big change? Where are the risks? Where are those risky areas? So we got that from out of the Tonkin and Taylor, the river mouths, etc., down the lower end, where all the waterway, all the rivers, streams converse. Big question around the likes of Pakawhais. Hey, I think the S Valley and people moving out. Those are some big questions as a community we have to deal with. So this is some of the stuff that can be quick, and some of it's going to be long, drawn out. And to be frankly, bulk of it, you ain't going to be here. So I think don't think too far ahead, because this is going to be several tendencies of councillors who are going to have to deal with the whole thing, unless you're Neil. I was going to say that.
What did he say? The two?
I
won't repeat it.
Yeah. So, so I think it's understanding that what can this particular council today influence?
Yes. Kia ora. Thank you, Mike.
Set a motion, yeah.
Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Nick and team, for coming up with this format, which is kind of just the start of putting, that big report and a lot of recommendations into some sort of order for us to be able to start to work on. Probably no surprises what my community down in CHB still think is the priority, and that's around the gravel. So I'm just targeting on that number 32. Just around their recommendation to be more directive, I thought we kind of had that under control with the global consent. Is that?
So I think the comments being about more directive are in the regional policy statement, so maybe Katrina can come up and...
Yes, please.
Recommendation 32, be more proactive in managing the gravel.
Pardon, be more directive.
More proactive in managing gravel. Is that what you're doing, Councillor?
No, sorry, but I did forget to mention that what was mentioned in the Tonkin and Taylor report too, that part. But no, around the directing contractors to go to where the above grade line is.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So what I can say there is that's precisely what we're doing now.
Yes.
So in terms of, so I think what we clearly articulated as part of our funding submission for that IRG COVID recovery funding was that the market mechanisms didn't work for all locations. And so, yes, we can be more directive, but if the market doesn't operate, we can't force contractors into certain locations. So I think it is a challenge. So we need to invest in the infrastructure in terms of access roads and access to certain areas, and that's an ongoing piece of work. We do need to direct our contractors to where the gravel is, and we do that through a process of an annual report based on survey results. And we're actively seeking funding to effectively compensate contractors where it may be uneconomic for them to extract gravel out of. So that's going to be a challenge for us to continue. So we will be directive, but if the market forces don't work for those particular contractors, then we'll have a funding shortfall. So I guess that's just what we've got to work through. And there's also mechanisms where we can direct contractors to take some material from less favourable areas where we do provide them with access from a more favourable area. So that's already sort of part of our approach as well. But one of my concerns is once the IRG funding is fully expended, and if we do have a downturn in the economy, how those market forces supporting that essential maintenance activity of removing gravel. So we'll continue to try and seek funding from government. That's one avenue. But it's all I'm highlighting is it's sort of not guaranteed and a bit of a challenge.
Just also add to that we put intergenerational because it's ongoing. It's not a one-off, build a structure and then it's in place. This is an ongoing
We'll have to do it forever, basically.
Absolutely.
Ongoing forever.
Yeah, so sorry, Chair, second question was going to be around the funding, and presumably the IIG co-funding model is kind of still the best one we've got, and so we absolutely have to keep asking, that question, and I guess highlight, how successful it's been so far. But it's just to your point, Louise. It's not a one-off. It's just got to keep happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? So, Nick, in terms of what you've heard around the table, can you surmise, please, if you think there needs to be any changes to the recommendations, particularly the 4 recommendations in which revolves around improving the way that we communicate flood risk, enable others to make informed decisions for community safety and well-being. I'm guessing that's safety being those 4.
To be honest, Chair, I'll take Council's guidance on that. What I took from the conversation was, and Councillor Williams talked about it, I think if we had that 4-stage strategic process sitting on the top of all the reporting we do, it helps this helps to centre this table and officers on what it is we're trying to achieve, because as one of the elected members said, there'll be multiple councils will go through this process, and we kind of want to always come back to what's the thing that centres us on getting our priorities done. And for me to be able to say, to provide you advice that, well, actually, we're still 3/4 of the way through Niwi. I've got capacity to do that, but not this. But if you want to do that, then let's talk to the community in Annual Plan X about resourcing that piece up, or me diverting resource from somewhere else in the organisation. So I think that strategic framework across the top would really help our reporting.
Right. Councillor Roadley.
I was just ready to move if we're... Are we there?
Yes. Yes,
Right,
please, Councillor Roadley.
yes, I'd like to move then 1 through to 7 as listed there. Yes, we don't need to read them, do we?
No.
I'd like you to read them all.
And I would like to add a further recommendation, a further motion, please. And I'll come back and speak to it. But so it would be number 8, and would read, instructs the Chief Executive to collaborate with the Crown Manager, Wairoa District Council, Taruataru o Te Wairoa, the Matangi Road Reserves Board, and the local Wairoa community at place to 1, identify and develop the most effective management structure for the bar, and 2, ensure that the structure gains the Wairoa community's confidence in the decision-making process.
Thank you, Councillor Roadley. Do we have a seconder for that, Councillor Williams?
Well, I was actually going to propose a 9th.
Okay, I'll just get a second for that.
I'll have to second that, but maybe Councillor Lambert would want to second that one.
Yes.
Councillor Lambert, would you like to second that? Fantastic, thank you. Okay.
Do we speak to that, or do we go straight to 9?
Leanne, would you like to guide us, because we've got a 9?
So, if you are interested, could we add the number 9 as well? And if anybody else wants to add anything else, and then we can deal with them all together?
10. Come on, 10.
Yes, but I'm warning how many add-ons we're going to have here, so please be mindful of that, or else we'll be here all day.
Never seen such a long recommendation before, so we might as well.
We've given a lot to the stuff already, but Councillor Williams, you're number 9.
Yeah,
please.
Something like that the council prepare, adopt and communicate a staged program of implementation of the NIWI projects, the IFIRP recommendations, bracket short-term, urgent, intermediate, long-term, along with an engagement program for the longer-term vision and recommendation 3 in particular.
Yes, could you send those words to me?
Yeah, I can. Do you want me to say that slowly?
Yes, please.
Council prepare, adopt and communicate a staged program of implementation of the NIWI projects, the IFIRP recommendations, bracket short-term stroke urgent, intermediate and long-term,
Sorry.
bracket short-term stroke urgent, intermediate and long-term, along with an engagement program for the long-term vision around recommendation 3 in particular.
You happy to second that?
I just want to bring up a point of order. I think it's probably the best way to deal with it. But
Okay.
I fully endorse Councillor Williams' sentiments and passion around this long-term visioning, but I'm just not sure that it's appropriate that we elevate one recommendation out of the flood review in the way that he's suggesting.
So drop the reference for 3, I'm just
I just think that would be, because I think it's implicit in what you're
Yeah,
doing.
no, you're right.
I just think we should probably drop that particular reference.
Yeah, that's
Are you
good.
happy with that,
Yeah,
Councillor
happy
Williams?
to, just longer term recommendations in particular.
Cool.
So I have up until engagement program for the long term.
Recommendations in particular. The longer term IFIRP recommendations in particular.
Are you happy to second that?
Absolutely.
Fantastic, okay. So, you're right, Leanne. So we're going to recommendation 8. Councillor Roadley, would you like to speak to your motion?
I would, thank you. I'm reflecting on particularly the recommendations that flow 36 through to 46 from the report, particularly the recommendation 43. The importance of embedding community and our historical knowledge into the planning that we do really resonates with me. The opportunity to reimagine not just the way that we live with our rivers, but a whittle to how we reimagine how we engage with our community, with them as active participants in the planning, right from their establishment. I'm drawn to the concept of citizens' assemblies, where a structured approach to that, not just engagement after the fact, but actually deeply embedded. We know from our reviews that the Wairoa Bar plays a huge role in flood resilience for the Wairoa community, and the current structure is a long-term legacy that the community have asked to be different. This is our opportunity to respond to that request and to progress this really important aspect. So.
Thank you, Councillor Roadley. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I totally agree with Councillor Roadley, and the fact that Hurricane Gabrielle the timing was actually during the day. If it had been any other time, people would really been in trouble back in Wairoa. In fact, in a lot of other places too. So yeah, how we monitor and warn people is really and how we share responsibility for alerting people is really high on the agenda. I can see their point. It doesn't seem practical for people 80 miles away to give orders to people who are really right on the cusp of the sea, as well as at the end of the river valley. So yeah, we should definitely make tracks to get this done.
I commend you, Di, for bringing this forward, and it's one thing that we can do differently in Wairoa that incorporates local knowledge and inclusivity into the decision making of how we manage that going forward. So this is what we can do immediately, and I thank you for bringing it to the table for us to consider and decide today. Kilda. Are there any other speakers? There are none. Thank you. I'd like to then move on to 9, and go through the procedure with 9 and then vote them all together. Okay. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, I don't think I need to say any more about that.
Yep.
That's what I just
Okay.
talked about before. So
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Nothing more from me, thank you.
And no other speakers for recommendation 9? There are none, so all recommendations up to 9 are on the table. All of those.
We love you, Craig.
All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Well done. Kia ora. Thank you, team.
Some things before part 2.
Well done.
Okay, team, we're moving on to item 7, which is the report from the Risk and Audit Committee. Who have we got leading this? Susie? Thank you, Susie. Susie.
Hi everyone. Hopefully this is short and sweet today. The Risk and Audit Committee was held on the 31st of July, and I just want to cover off a couple of comments and escalations made through that forum. I think on that day there was recognition off the back of the long-term plan, the revenue and financing. The independent flood review had just landed that sentiment across the organisation was slightly flat at that time, combined with a lot of external attention and of movements in central government. A couple of things that were escalated through, we acknowledged the current risk profile at the moment, noting that we have some higher risk currently in our cybersecurity space. We have recently had some escalations through, or at that time, from the GCSB around cyber instances. We have some action plans across the organisation at the moment that has seen an increase in the controls put in place to manage and monitor that, as well as increased staff training that was lacking in the prior audit committee, as noted. We also were spoke through and advised around our current insurance premiums. We saw a changing of the guard in July around our insurer, moving from Marsh to Aon, and we subsequently had a workshop on that, which some of you attended anyway, just around some of our premiums. Hey, look, the sentiment across the organisation, certainly from the councillors, is one that is seen as a little bit more risky across our organisation than that felt with the executive team. We saw that through the sentiment survey, and that we talked through a number of those instances and what the drivers may be of that in the committee. We continue to enhance and embed that new framework, so I'm under no illusion that the work that our consultant David Nolder is doing is helping. We still need to get better at that. We still need to operationalise that design so that things through the audit committee is and that is all I want to say at the moment.
Thank you, Susie. Any questions for Susie from this meeting? Councillor Williams.
Yeah, just one question. Thank you, Susie. Item 4.2. Long outstanding actions from internal audits, bigger priorities, so those would be closed. Can you just give me a couple of examples to illustrate the level at which we've closed out things that have been hanging around for a while?
So specifically about 3 years ago, we had an audit, and forgive me, prior to my time, potentially called human resource, let's just call it that for use of a better word. That audit raised some recommendations around us ensuring that we had adequate succession planning and learning and development pathways for our staff. Now, At the time, there was a resource assigned to that. That wasn't put in place or embedded as such across the organisation, and as such, that audit issue remained open until we could prove that that was done. Through the cyclone, as you'll appreciate, we reprioritised a number of things, and at this stage, we believe executive officers that in critical roles, we will have succession planning in place, but not necessarily across the whole org right now. We're not saying it's not important, we are just choosing not to prioritise that at the moment. That's an example of two.
No further questions? There are none. Councillor Harding?
Happy to move the motion.
If you move, happy to second. Would you like to speak, Councillor Harding?
Yeah, just briefly, thank you. Look, in the absence of our independent chair as deputy, I just wanted to relay a couple of things. One, and sometimes I write these things down because my memory's not that great, but they're little gems occasionally, and one of them was something that Susie didn't quite mention, but she definitely pointed out on the day that this organisation is suffering from review fatigue at the moment. They've been through a lot, so it has the successive reviews. Whilst really, really important, they put a lot of pressure on the organisation and on staff, and it would be remiss of me not to recognise that, and just to ensure that all of us as councillors understand the pressure that that's brought and the work that staff have done to deliver. So that was, and a follow on from that is that what we call in the trade the assurance universe, so the list of and the pipeline of assurance through this committee is deliberately been set a little bit light in recognition not only of the amount of reviewing that's been going on, but also because of our upcoming efficiency and effectiveness review. So there will be, in terms of assurance, the effectiveness review side of that, most of the pipeline is looking like that efficiency and effectiveness review. So that was one point. The other point is I just wanted to highlight the fantastic work of our new Chief Information Officer in response to the near miss incident with the rainfall data. A host of changes have been made as a result of that. We now have change freezes in advance of weather events. We have a change advisory board, been review of privileges, and there is a critical response team in place now for all IT events, not just cyber events. So that's outstanding work. Thank you.
Got a good summary, thank you, Zane. Councillor Curtin.
Oh, no, I think we need to review our review processes straight away.
That's enough from this.
It's enough from us.
Yeah. You two, you're in the naughty corner, you two.
Is that a promise?
We're nearly there. Kia kaha. Ka whai. Okay, all those who agree with receiving these recommendations, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you, Susie.
Did we have a seconder for that one, Chair?
No,
I did.
That's why I got to speak. So we have the summary report from Coastal Hazards Joint Committee meeting.
Really not much to add. We've been through that quite in detail this morning, and that was the result of those two particular meetings.
Okay.
Highlight maybe that we did some additional work on funding, and the principles will come to us as a council in the report. So
We can take the rest as read. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? There aren't any. We've
I'll
got
move that they be
mover
accepted.
and a seconder. Councillor McIntosh. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. We now move into the public excluded part of our meeting. Do we have any questions as to why we are moving into public excluded? If there are none.
Well, you could explain. Yes, please.
Yes, please. There is a rationale.
Yes, please.
Yes. The rationale to moving into public excluded is because we will be discussing the Chief Executive performance review. That is the topic of the paper. And the rationale is around obviously an employee's performance reviews and salary negotiations. They're private matters. Yes. Between the employer and the employee only, so that is us and our Chief Executive, Dr. Nick Peat. The public interest is served by the C's salary being declared in the council's annual report each year. So that's where visibility is given, but these are private discussions as to how we evaluate the performance.
Thank you.
So if I am happy to move that. Give a second. Seconder, councillor Sears. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora.